Welcome to the moment when American shells simply bounced. Normandy, 1944. The echo of gunfire rolled across the hedgerows, and somewhere in that haze, U.S. tank crews realized the unthinkable. Their guns couldn't kill what was coming. The Tiger tank's steel precision fear a monster born from German engineering and battlefield desperation. When its armor deflected their shots, it didn't just save the crew inside. It shattered the illusion of Allied dominance. Imagine it. The clang of ricochets ringing off its hull, sparks flashing like lightning across gray metal, the smell of burnt powder hanging in the air. Soldiers stared frozen, half in awe, half in disbelief, watching their 75mm rounds crumble into fragments. Somewhere in the chaos, someone whispered into the radio. It bounced. God help us, it bounced. June 4. The roads of Normandy were narrow, hemmed in by hedgerows so thick you could barely see 20 feet ahead. The ground shook with the rhythm of engines, the shouts of orders, the grinding of gears. Across those fields, Sherman tanks advanced cautiously, unaware that just beyond the next ridge, a German Tiger waited with its gun already leveled. Its barrel moved slow, deliberate, the way a predator breathes before it strikes. Then came the flash. One shell. One explosion. One moment that made every American tanker understand they were no longer the hunters. The Tiger's armor, nearly 4 inches thick on the front, shrugged off impacts that would have gutted any other machine. Each hit sparked like rain on stone. To the men who saw it, it wasn't just a tank. It was something unnatural, heavy, silent, invincible. It rolled forward as if the war itself bowed to its weight. Those who survived called it the beast that couldn't die. Those who didn't left only smoke and twisted steel behind. And yet, in every story told, in every letter home, in every trembling memory, recorded decades later, one sound remained the same: the hollow clang of futility. Before we begin, take a moment. Imagine you're in that field. The air thick with dust and diesel, your hands trembling on a weapon that suddenly feels useless. Picture that first ricochet, the spark, the silence after the shot, and the cold realization spreading through the ranks that this war had just changed. Before we go further, leave a comment where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening. Maybe it's 0:34, maybe 0:52. Because every second from here you'll feel what they felt, the disbelief, the fear, and the moment when courage met the impossible. This is the story of when American troops first realized their weapons couldn't pierce the Tiger's skin, when the battlefield itself held its breath, and the myth of invincibility was born. June 1944. Normandy was no longer just a name on a map, it had become a landscape carved by fire. The beaches were behind them now, left smoldering under the morning haze. But ahead lay something older, stranger, more silent. The bocage. Green, endless walls of hedgerow and earth that swallowed sound and light alike. To the men of the American 1st and 2nd Armored Divisions, it felt less like France and more like a dream, the kind that shifts between beauty and danger without warning. You could smell the wet soil after the rain, the faint sweetness of grass crushed beneath tank treads, and then the acrid bite of cordite from somewhere unseen. The war had changed shape. The ocean was gone. The enemy had learned to hide in silence. The countryside seemed peaceful at first glance. Narrow roads twisting through villages of whitewashed stone and low roofs. Orchards heavy with fruit cows wandering the meadows like the war had forgotten them. But it hadn't. The Germans had turned that peace into a weapon. They knew every hedge, every slope, every hidden path. They had marked the land as surely as the farmers who'd plowed it centuries before. And somewhere behind those hedgerows, the Tiger waited. It wasn't chance that placed the Tiger here. It was intention precise, cold, mathematical. German command had studied Allied movement after D-Day and understood one truth: the Americans were fast, confident, aggressive, but blind. Their tanks moved in columns down roads barely wide enough for a single vehicle, boxed in by earth and greenery. No room to maneuver, no space to retreat. A perfect corridor for ambush. The Tiger Crew's veterans from the Eastern Front knew exactly what that meant. They had learned patience in the snows of Kursk, where one well-aimed shot could rewrite the fate of a battalion. Now, under the pale Norman sky, they waited again, this time against an enemy that thought it had already won. The air was different here. Thick, heavy with humidity and smoke. Soldiers spoke of the sound that came before a tiger appeared. Not the roar of its engine, but the tremor it left in the ground. It wasn't a noise you heard, it was one you felt. A low, rolling pulse beneath your boots, like the earth itself exhaling. "It's coming," someone would whisper, and that whisper was enough to still every heart in the line. American tanks, the M4 Shermans advanced cautiously, now their engines growling through mud and shadow. The gunners scanned every hedge, every barn, every flicker of light that might reveal a barrel. The radio crackled, broken by static and nerves. Somewhere a voice said, "All clear." And that's when it happened, the first strike. The shell came out of nowhere. A flash, a sound that cracked the world open, and the lead tank vanished in smoke and dust. The column halted, men shouting, turning unsure which direction the shot had come from. Then another, and another. The Tiger didn't need to hurry. It fired once, moved 10 meters, fired again. By the time the Americans found its position, it was already gone, vanished behind another line of trees, another curtain of mist. To the men inside the Shermans, it was like fighting a ghost. They fired back, of course they always did, but the shells struck the Tiger's armor and slid away like rain off stone. It bounced, someone said into the radio voice, trembling. It just bounced. That word became legend. It spread faster than the smoke itself. The Tiger was not everywhere, but it might as well have been. The Germans had less than 15 of them in some sectors, yet every American soldier swore there were dozens. Rumor became weapon. Each battle report spoke of one Tiger, confirmed, two suspected. Each campfire retelling added new details, armor too thick for mortal weapons gunners who could see through fog tracks that never broke. It didn't matter what was true. In war, belief is sometimes stronger than fact. Still, there were facts, cold, undeniable ones. The Tiger's armor was 100 millimeters thick in front its cannon, the 88mm KBK-36, a weapon capable of piercing anything the Allies possessed. It weighed 57 tons, burned fuel like a small city, and yet it moved with grace, steady and terrifying. Its silhouette, flat turret, broad gun tracks wide as a man's shoulders, was unmistakable. Soldiers described it like a living thing. It moves slow, one said, but when it sees you, it moves fast. The Tiger wasn't just a machine. It was a statement. A message from a dying empire that still refused to kneel. By 1944, Germany's factories were crumbling under Allied bombing. Fuel was scarce. Spare parts were a miracle. And yet, they kept building Tigers, each one hand-assembled, each one treated like a relic. It wasn't efficiency. It was pride. If they could no longer win with numbers, they would win with fear. The Americans had their own kind of pride, industrial, pragmatic, unshakable. They believed in production, in speed, in replacing what was lost before the smoke cleared. For every Tiger the Germans rolled out, the U.S. produced 100 Shermans. But numbers didn't help when you were the one inside the tank, watching your shot glance off an enemy that seemed immortal. The arithmetic of war means little when you can hear the shell whine past your ear. As the summer deepened, the fields of Normandy turned from green to gray. The once lush hedgerows were torn apart by artillery, the earth blackened by gasoline and fire. Villages lay in ruined walls, gutted steeples collapsed. Yet the tiger still prowled, sometimes alone, sometimes with Panzer IVs for company, always striking where it hurt most. It became the centerpiece of every engagement, the uninvited god of every battle. In one letter home, an infantryman wrote, "We never see them until they shoot. We fire, they don't flinch. Our tanks look small beside them, toys made of tin. When one shows up, everything stops. The ground stops. The men stop. Even time seems to stop." He didn't exaggerate. Entire offensives paused for a single tiger. Whole companies waited for air support rather than risk meeting one head-on. To destroy it required not just firepower, but faith that it could be destroyed at all. And yet, there was beauty in that fear. War is strange like that. The tiger was terrible, but it was also magnificent, a machine that embodied the very idea of human mastery over metal precision turned into poetry. Even the men who fought against it couldn't help but admire it. After battles, survivors would approach wrecked tigers as if approaching a cathedral. They'd run their fingers over the armor, stare into the black mouth of the gun, whisper something they couldn't quite name. Normandy became the proving ground, not only for nations, but for belief. The Americans learned that courage is not charging forward blindly. It's continuing to move even when your mind tells you to stop. The Germans learned that perfection can be its own prison. The tiger was powerful, but too rare, too heavy, too costly. Each victory it claimed slowed the army it fought for. By the time the dust settled over St. Lo, the myth was already written. The tiger was no longer a weapon, it was a symbol. A story whispered from trench to trench across generations. It represented something that transcended tactics, the moment when men realized that strength alone could terrify, that armor could be both shield and curse. And there, in that strange summer of 1944, two worlds collided: the industrial confidence of America and the engineered pride of Germany. One built to mass produce, the other built to endure. Between them lay the bocage, a world of shadows and smoke, where tanks became ghosts, and men learned that even victory could sound like the echo of a ricochet, fading into the fog. The truth was simple and terrifying. The Tiger tank was not a rumor, not a legend, not a whisper of German propaganda. It was real. A machine built for one purpose: to dominate. Its name, Panzerkampfwagen 6, Tiger Osef. E sounded almost ceremonial, as if the engineers who made it believed they were crafting something sacred. Each one rolled from the Henschel factory at Kassel, like a monument, 57 tons of armored resolve. Each plate measured, each rivet perfect. No shortcuts, no compromises. It began in 1942, born from a meeting in Berlin, where Adolf Hitler demanded a tank that could crush any enemy. The Eastern Front had already swallowed thousands of German machines under Soviet fire. T-34s and KV-1s had shown that the old Panzer III and I-4 were obsolete. Hitler wanted revenge not in numbers, but in superiority. "We must build a tank that no shell can pierce," he said. And they did. By the time the first Tigers appeared near Leningrad, they were already changing the psychology of war. Reports came back to Berlin describing Soviet shells bouncing harmlessly away. Crews inside those steel beasts laughed as they advanced, shells ringing against their armor like hail on a cathedral roof. That sound, that impossible clang, would later echo through Normandy. When the Americans met the Tiger in 1944, they were not the first to feel that dread. They were simply the next chapter. Its specifications read like myth made into math: a Maybach HB engine, 12 cylinders, 700 horsepower. A gun so powerful it had once been used to shoot down aircraft. Armor up to 100 millimeters thick on the front, 80 on the sides. Every plate interlocked, welded, reinforced. No shortcuts. Each Tiger took 300,000 man-hours to build. Each required rare alloys, precision machining, care that bordered on obsession. It was not mass-produced, it was handcrafted like a weapon from another age. The result was something unlike anything else on the battlefield. It didn't fight, it hunted. A Tiger could destroy a Sherman at 2,000 meters before the American tank's gun could even reach back. At that range, the 88mm shell didn't just kill it, erased. A direct hit could blow the turret clear off, throwing it 30 feet into the air. Survivors said the air itself cracked when that gun fired. The Americans had believed in quantity. Their doctrine was mobility, flank fast, strike faster, rely on numbers and air support. The Sherman was light, quick, reliable. But against a Tiger, reliability didn't matter. The first time U.S. engineers saw one up close, they measured its plates in disbelief. "We can't make armor like this one," said, shaking his head. "It's not cost, it's faith." Faith? Yes. Because the Tiger was built not just with metal, but with belief. Germany had poured its pride, its defiance, its very myth of invincibility into every bolt. To the Allies, it was madness. To the Germans, it was destiny. And yet, that destiny came at a cost. The Tiger was magnificent, but it was also fragile in its own way. For every hour it fought, it required 3 hours of maintenance. Its fuel consumption was enormous, nearly 500 liters for every 100 kilometers. Many were abandoned, not because they were destroyed, but because they ran dry. Mechanics joked the Tiger drinks more than a regiment. Logistics officers cursed it as a burden. But the men who drove it, they called it home. Inside, the air was hot, metallic, alive with vibration. The gun breech hissed, hydraulics groaned. 5 men lived inside that space: commander, gunner, loader, driver, radio operator. They moved like a single organism. One heartbeat, one rhythm. The commander's periscope was their world. Through it he saw and decided. Left 5 degrees, he'd say. Fire, then silence. One shell, one death. The Americans, studying battlefield wrecks, discovered just how deliberate it all was. The armor was face-hardened, a combination of manganese and nickel that caused shells to shatter instead of penetrate. The tracks were double width to bear its weight on soft ground. The gun stabilization system was primitive but effective, a masterpiece of balance. Even the optics, Zeiss lenses hand-polished to surgical precision, could spot a target 2 kilometers away. The office of the Chief of Ordnance in Washington received its first captured Tiger in 1944. They tested it shell after shell. Nothing pierced the front. At 500 yards, even the high-velocity 76mm gun failed. Only the experimental 90mm anti-aircraft gun fired at point-blank range could do it. The report was grim. Under normal combat conditions, frontal attack against Tiger tanks is ineffective. That sentence traveled fast. It reached every division commander, every tank battalion leader, and soon it reached the men. Ineffective. The word stung worse than the truth itself. It meant they had to change the way they fought. New tactics emerged. Instead of charging, they learned to circle, to bait, to flank, to swarm. 5 Shermans for 1 Tiger. Sacrifice was built into the equation. Some called it bravery. Others called it arithmetic murder. But the soldiers did it anyway because they had no choice. And still, the Tiger had a presence that statistics couldn't explain. There were only about 1,347 built, but their impact was immeasurable. U.S. Army intelligence estimated that in every engagement where a Tiger appeared, Allied advance slowed by at least 48 hours. Fear traveled faster than armor. Rumor fought harder than bullets. It wasn't just the machine, it was the myth. Allied propagandists sometimes tried to downplay it, calling it overrated, mechanically unreliable. But the frontline soldiers didn't care. To them, every burned-out Sherman was proof. Every ricochet was gospel. They knew what it meant to watch a shell hit steel and bounce away like a stone off a lake. That sound haunted them. And yet, even the myth couldn't hide the cracks. German engineers complained they could never produce enough spare parts. Crews improvised cannibalizing destroyed Tigers just to keep others running. Engines overheated. Transmissions failed. The more powerful the tank became, the more it demanded like a god that took as much as it gave. American intelligence files from late 1944 contain an unusual note. Handwritten in the margin of a combat report, an analyst had scrawled, "A magnificent weapon, in the wrong war." He was right. The Tiger belonged to a world of craftsmen and warriors, but it was fighting a world of factories and endless convoys. For every Tiger lost, 10 Shermans rolled off an assembly line. The math was destiny. Still on the battlefield, destiny had a way of hesitating. When a Tiger rolled into view, everything stopped: the math, the logic, the production lines. For a few terrible minutes, it was one-on-one again, man against monster, courage against inevitability. That's the paradox of the Tiger. It was doomed from the start, but unforgettable to the end. A masterpiece of design born into an age that had no patience for masterpieces. The Americans with their maps and factories would win the war, but the men who fought them would never forget what it felt like to face something that seemed untouchable. And somewhere in that paradox lies the truth of the Tiger. Not just as a machine, but as an idea. A symbol of pride that became a curse. A weapon that changed how soldiers saw war and themselves. Because after Normandy, after the smoke cleared, and after the myth was measured in reports and numbers, one fact remained: the Tiger had defied their bullets. But it could not defy time. It rusted in the fields of France, its steel bones slowly sinking into the earth it once ruled. And yet even now, when you stand in those quiet meadows, you can almost hear it. The echo of a shell striking metal. The faint hum of a Maybach engine that refuses to fade. That was the truth beneath the myth, the iron heart of the Tiger still beating in memory. The morning began with fog, a thin gray shroud that hung low over the hedgerows of Normandy, blurring the world into shadow and silence. Sergeant William Hayes sat hunched inside his Sherman tank, his fingers blackened by oil and tobacco. The engine throbbed behind him, steady and alive, a heartbeat of steel. He could feel the vibration through the soles of his boots. Outside, the sound of distant gunfire drifted like thunder, faint, directionless, almost unreal. They'd been told this sector was clear, that the Germans had fallen back, that victory was moving faster than fear. But Hayes had learned not to trust the silence. It had a way of lying, just before the world exploded. The hedgerows loomed on both sides, high, thick green walls older than any war. They trapped sound, swallowed movement, hid death behind leaves. "Stay close," he said quietly, his voice low and steady, more habit than command. His crew nodded, Dunn on the gun, Lasky on the loader, Davis on the radio. Young men with tired eyes carrying the look of people who had learned to live inside seconds. The tank crawled forward, its treads grinding against damp earth. Mud clung to its armor, splattered across the hatch. The morning light was weak, almost blue. It fell across Hayes's face like memory, soft, cold, and temporary. They reached a fork in the road, narrow, overgrown, the kind of place where everything felt wrong. Davis leaned closer to the radio. "Command says enemy armor's retreating northeast," he murmured. Hayes didn't answer. He just listened. To the air, to the rhythm of the engine, to that strange silence between the noises of war. Then beneath it all, something new, a hum low and deep like thunder buried underground. He stiffened. Hold. The crew froze. No one spoke. The hum grew louder, not like a truck, not like a jeep. Slower, heavier. It wasn't a sound you heard. It was a sound you felt. The soil trembled slightly. The branches overhead shivered. Dunn's hand hovered over the gun controls. "That's not ours," he whispered. Hayes leaned into the periscope, peering into fog and leaves. For a second, nothing. Then movement. A shadow shifting behind the mist, enormous, deliberate. A faint glint of steel through branches, and then the sound gears turning slow, patient, inevitable. Contact front, Hayes breathed. The next second tore the world apart. A flash bright as lightning, and the lead Sherman ahead vanished in a storm of smoke and fire. The explosion ripped through the road, flinging dirt into the air like rain. The shockwave slammed through their hull, rattling bolts loose. Lasky cursed. Dunn gripped the gun. Davis fumbled with the radio. "We're hit. Front tank down. We're hit. Static." Hayes shouted above the noise, "Reverse, reverse." The Tiger fired again. The sound was not a sound. It was pressure. It was the sky collapsing inward. The shell missed by yards but hit close enough to make the Sherman jump. The smell of burning oil filled the air. Hayes's voice cut through the chaos, "Target front fire when ready." Dunn aimed, sweat running down his neck. Firing. The gun thundered a recoil that punched the whole tank backward. Through the periscope, Hayes saw their shot land, sparks showering across the Tiger's flank. And then, nothing. The shell bounced. It bounced. Jesus Christ. Dunn gasped. It didn't even scratch it. The Tiger didn't stop. It turned its gun slowly, almost lazily, as if watching them struggle was part of the ritual. The barrel centered on them, steady, merciless, inevitable. Back now, Hayes barked. The Sherman lurched, treads screeching as it backed into the hedge. Branches cracked, leaves exploded across the hatch. The Tiger fired. The blast hit close enough to peel the paint from their right side. Shrapnel tore through the air like knives. Davis screamed, hit by a fragment that caught his shoulder. The smell of blood mixed with smoke, a copper tang thick enough to taste. Lasky pulled him back, pressing his hand over the wound. "You're good, buddy. You're good." But his voice shook. Hayes gritted his teeth. Flank left through the orchard move. They broke through the hedge, the world exploding into noise and color. Branches snapped, apples fell like rain, the tank swayed hard as it crashed over roots. Behind them, another explosion tore the earth apart. The Tiger was firing blind now, but it didn't matter. Each shot felt close enough to end everything. The orchard was a maze of smoke and trees. Visibility 20 yards at best. The Sherman groaned as it swung its gun toward the sound. "Can't see it," Dunn yelled. "It's there," Hayes said quietly. "It's always there." They crept forward again, through mud and fire. Every nerve strained, every second longer than the last. Then the mist shifted, and there it was. The Tiger moving through the smoke like a living thing. Its armor glowed dull orange from heat. Its turret turned slow, graceful, deliberate. It felt unreal, too perfect, too calm. Fire, Hayes snapped. The Sherman fired. Another spark, another ricochet. The Tiger didn't even flinch. Its gun rose a few inches, steadied, then flashed. The shell hit them square on the right track. The world slammed sideways. Metal screamed. The interior went dark except for the glow of instruments. Dunn slumped forward, silent, gone before anyone could speak. Lasky's scream echoed raw and broken. Hayes pulled him back, shouting orders that no one could hear. The air filled with smoke sparks, choking heat. Out. Get out. They pushed through the hatch, stumbling into the orchard. The world was orange and black, fire crawling up the branches, smoke curling like ghosts. The tiger loomed ahead, half hidden by haze. Hayes fell to his knees, clutching his side eyes wide. He could see the barrel turning again, the final movement, the last punctuation of inevitability. Then, from somewhere far off, the scream of engines, Allied aircraft diving from the clouds. A single streak of silver cut through the gray, a roar overhead, then the whistle of rockets. The tiger paused. One explosion, then another. Fire bloomed across the field. The beast shuddered once, twice, and went still. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. Hayes lay in the dirt, ears ringing, lungs burning. The tiger burned, black smoke rising like a monument. The orchard was gone. Only the stumps and the dead remained. He whispered something, a prayer, a curse, maybe both. "We got it." His voice trembled. "We actually got it." He didn't know then that the tiger's crew was already gone, killed before they could escape. He didn't know that the wreck would be photographed by engineers, studied by officers, turned into a field report. All he knew was that it was over for now. The sky cleared by evening. Smoke drifted low across the valley. Crows circled above the wrecks. Someone found Dunn's helmet in the mud, its edge torn by shrapnel. Someone else found Lasky's rifle leaning against a tree, untouched. The war had moved on, but the ground still held the story. Years later, in a quiet interview room, Lasky, older now, face lined with decades, spoke of that day. "I remember the sound," he said softly. "The way the shell hit and didn't break. You can't forget that sound. It's not just noise, it's something deeper. It's disbelief, like the world itself saying no." He paused, his hands trembling slightly. "You don't fight the tiger. You survive it." He smiled almost sadly. "And if you do, you spend the rest of your life wondering how." That day in the orchard became one of many, just another entry in an endless list of skirmishes and losses, a few lines in a report. A map reference lost in the archives. But for the men who lived it, it never ended. The war moved on, but the echo stayed, the sound of a shot that bounced, the memory of fire crawling across green fields, the weight of a machine that seemed too perfect to die. Because war isn't made of victories or defeats, it's made of moments like that. Moments where courage doesn't win, it simply refuses to disappear. And in the silence that followed, in the stillness, after steel met steel, the tiger's roar lingered, low, eternal, like thunder waiting in the distance. When the smoke of Villers-Bocage thinned, when the burned-out tanks cooled and the birds dared to return to the hedgerows, the war kept moving. But what lingered, what haunted every soldier and every strategist, was not the fire nor the loss, but the echo of disbelief. How could a single tank do that? The Americans had faced artillery rockets, Luftwaffe strafing, but nothing shook them like the realization that their own shells could strike and fail. That sound, the metallic scream of deflection, was not just physics, it was psychological. It meant their faith in superiority had a crack. The tiger, in truth, was never meant to win a war. It was meant to change one, to bend the rhythm, to make every Allied commander second-guess his maps, his timing, his courage. In that, it succeeded completely. After the first encounters in Normandy, combat reports were filled with hesitation. Platoons stopping mid-advance, waiting for air support that might not come. Tankers who once moved boldly through villages now advanced in silence, every gunner straining to spot a glint of steel behind the hedges. Fear became a tactic. It slowed everything. Germany understood this better than anyone. They had always built weapons as messages. The V-2 rocket, the jet fighter, the Tiger, none were designed purely for efficiency. They were built to speak, to remind the world that even in retreat, German engineering could still defy gravity, defy defeat, defy the very rules of war. But in that pursuit of perfection, they had already begun to lose. Because perfection demands time, precision, rare metals, steady fuel luxuries that a nation surrounded on all sides no longer possessed. Across the ocean in Detroit, in Pittsburgh, in Chicago, the American factories roared like a single colossal engine. Every hour another tank rolled off an assembly line. Not a masterpiece, not a miracle, but a tool built by the thousands, stamped from steel, tested, shipped, replaced. The men on the production floors worked 12-hour shifts under fluorescent light hands, black with grease faces, streaked with exhaustion. But they kept going because they could. America's secret weapon wasn't a machine. It was momentum. By the summer of 1944, that momentum was unstoppable. For every Tiger that crept from its assembly shed in Kassel, 20 Shermans rolled onto the docks at Cherbourg. For every German mechanic struggling to find spare parts, 10 American engineers were inventing new ways to repair in the field. Logistics replaced luck. Production replaced pride. The Germans built myths, the Americans built numbers. And in war, numbers, brutal, soulless, relentless, always win in the end. But that didn't make the encounters any less terrifying. To the man inside a Sherman, that arithmetic didn't matter. The ratio 5-for-1 was something commanders wrote on chalkboards, not something you could hold in your hands. Out there in the fields, all that mattered was the next turn, the next shell, the next breath. Soldiers whispered to each other, "If you see a Tiger, don't shoot it, flank it." But flanking required courage, coordination, and time. The Tiger rarely gave them any. Still, American crews learned fast. They adapted. In hedgerow country, they fought like ghosts themselves. They painted their tanks with mud to break the shine. They learned to move in packs, one drawing fire, the others circling wide through the brush. They coordinated with artillery, calling in time-on-target barrages that rained fire across the Tiger's suspected positions. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. But slowly, painfully, the legend began to fracture. Somewhere near St. Lo, a U.S. tank destroyer battalion managed to catch a Tiger in an open field. 3 M10s fired at once. One hit the side plate, another struck the rear, and the third jammed its turret ring. The German crew tried to bail, but the tank burned a pillar of black smoke rising above the trees. For hours afterward, soldiers gathered around the wreck, staring at it yet like pilgrims before a fallen idol. They touched the armor, ran fingers over the holes, murmured to one another, as if the machine could still hear. "So it can die," someone whispered. But for every wrecked Tiger, another story emerged, where it was invincible. Villages retold those tales of one tank holding back an entire company of a single gun, firing through 6 Shermans of armor that glowed but never broke. Reality blurred with reverence. The Tiger became both fact and folklore, as feared as it was admired. Even the men who destroyed one felt no triumph, only exhaustion, and a strange, unspoken respect. The contrast grew sharper with every mile the Allies advanced. The Americans moved with speed, convoys stretching from Normandy to Paris, then to the Rhine. Supply trucks, mechanics, engineers, an empire of motion. Behind them, Germany moved slower, tighter, smaller. Every Tiger that broke down was a loss that could not be replaced. Spare parts were cannibalized from wrecks. Some were abandoned simply because they ran out of fuel. The Tiger was a lion without a savannah, magnificent but starving. Inside the German ranks, even the commanders knew the truth. They wrote it down in reports, though few dared say it aloud. The Tiger is a tactical success and a strategic burden, one colonel admitted. Another called it a tank that wins battles and loses wars. The contradictions multiplied. Crews loved it. Generals cursed it. Hitler worshipped it, his engineers begged him to stop. But the machine once created had become something more than a weapon. It was an idea, and ideas rarely die when they should. By contrast, the American philosophy of war was almost crude but brutally effective. Keep it simple. Keep it moving. Every part interchangeable. Every tank expendable. If one broke, another filled its place. If one burned, three more took its road. It wasn't glory, it was arithmetic. And yet within that cold calculation lay the seed of victory, because while Germany worshipped perfection, America believed in persistence, and so the two philosophies clashed not just in metal, but in meaning. Each tiger that fired was a sculpted roar of defiance, a last gasp of empire. Each Sherman that rolled out of a factory was a whisper of inevitability, a promise that no single masterpiece could stop a storm of steel. The war had become less about courage and more about systems, about which machine could sustain the longer heartbeat. Still, to the men on both sides, it never felt like theory. It felt like survival. In one captured diary found after Falaise, a German gunner wrote, "Our tank is perfect, but the world is too large. We kill one, 10 take its place. We kill 10, 100 come." Perfection cannot stop the flood. He was 22. He died 2 days later. When the Allies reached the Siegfried Line, the Tigers fought their final battles like cornered beasts, ambushing convoys, crippling bridges, vanishing into forests. Many were blown up by their own crews rather than be captured. American engineers studied the wrecks, collecting measurements, photographs, fragments of steel. The data filled entire folders, but none of it explained how it felt to face one. Only the veterans could explain that. It wasn't fear, one tanker said years later. It was awe. Like watching the earth fight back. And yet, even awe fades. By 1945, the legend was fading too. The Allies had more planes, more bombs, more tanks, more everything. The Tiger couldn't move far enough, couldn't hide deep enough, couldn't breathe fast enough. The beast that had once haunted the fields of Normandy was now being hunted itself by an army that learned its every weakness. In the end, it wasn't pierced by a single perfect shot. It was buried under 1,000 imperfect ones, but even buried, it didn't vanish. Its myth survived, carried in the letters of soldiers, the sketches in field notebooks, the whispered memory of men who lived to tell. The Tiger became a paradox, a weapon too strong to live, too slow to win, too perfect to forget. It outlived the empire that built it, and it outlasted the fear it caused. Because somewhere, even today, when the sun sets over a quiet French field and the wind moves through the grass, you can almost hear it, the deep, impossible hum of a Maybach engine turning once more, the echo of steel against shell, and the distant heartbeat of a war that learned what it meant to meet perfection and survive it. By the autumn of 1944, the war had begun to turn. The hedgerows of Normandy were no longer green. They were blackened and broken, littered with the ghosts of burned-out machines, Shermans, Panthers, and even Tigers rusting together beneath the same gray rain. The air smelled of iron oil and wet soil. What had begun as a clash of armies was now something quieter, heavier. A slow unraveling. The Tiger was still feared. Its shadow stretched across every map, every convoy route, every whispered conversation around a field fire. But fear was no longer enough to win battles. The Americans had learned. They had adapted. And for the first time, the Tiger had begun to bleed. The lessons came hard, but they came fast. Tank destroyer units began moving in pairs, one to distract, one to flank. Infantry carried bazookas, now their shells tipped with hollow charges that could melt through armor. Air reconnaissance marked suspected tiger positions before dawn and before the beast could roar. Thunderbolts and typhoons screamed from the sky, their rockets trailing white arcs of death. It wasn't courage alone that changed the tide, it was coordination, communication, and the endless grinding rhythm of an army that refused to stop. Germany, by contrast, was starving for fuel, for metal, for time. Each tiger that left its depot was already half crippled by scarcity. Crews stripped parts from one machine to feed another. Fuel convoys were ambushed, refineries bombed into craters. In some divisions, tigers were towed into position by horses because their engines had no gas. The machine that once embodied power now dragged chains of desperation behind it. And yet, when they did appear, even in those final months, the effect was the same. The tiger still made men pause. It still made them breathe slower. It still carried the weight of something more than metal. But now the Americans didn't freeze, they prepared. They knew how to fight gods because they had learned gods could die. At Aricourt in Lorraine, it happened again. A morning fog tanks maneuvering through low fields, the familiar hum of engines. The 4th Armored Division clashed with German units fielding tigers and panthers. For hours, the fog turned the battlefield into a gray dream. The Tiger crews fired first, precise, confident, but the Americans had radar radio coordination speed. When the fog lifted, the math revealed itself. 46 German tanks lay wrecked. The Americans had lost 9. That was the moment the myth cracked. Reports came in from across the front, not of invincibility, but exhaustion. Crews abandoning tanks not from fear, but from futility. Mechanics unable to repair what factories could no longer replace. And the air itself had turned against them. By late '44, Allied aircraft ruled the sky. The Tiger's thick armor meant nothing when bombs fell from miles above. Its strength was built for duels, not for apocalypse. In one captured letter from a German tank commander to his wife, the handwriting is shaky, the ink stained with oil. They told us our tigers would make us immortal. But immortality is heavy, and it burns just like anything else. Berlin kept sending orders, hold the line, counterattack, reclaim what was lost, but the front kept shrinking. Each tiger that broke down was left behind. Some were blown up by their crews, others simply abandoned their cannons still pointed west like statues of defiance. The war had moved beyond them, past them, leaving their hulks as reminders of both genius and folly. American engineers studied the wrecks with quiet fascination. They measured armor thickness, gun elevation, internal systems. They photographed every inch, filed every note. The verdict was unanimous, a masterpiece of design, but too perfect to survive. Because perfection is fragile. It cannot bend, cannot adapt, cannot live in a world that changes faster than it can reload. The Tiger had been born in a war of movement, but it moved too slowly. It had been designed for victory, but fought in defeat. By the winter of 1944, even the Tiger's crews understood. The machine that once made them invincible was now a cage. They couldn't outrun pursuit, couldn't hide from air patrols, couldn't keep fighting without fuel. But still they fought. Out of pride, out of habit. Out of the strange devotion that soldiers have for the things that keep them alive, even as those things drag them to the grave. One surviving German commander described his last day in a Tiger. The snow fell hard. We had one shell left. The radio was dead. We waited for the Americans to appear through the smoke. We fired that last round, not at them, but into the sky. We wanted them to know we were still here. He was captured minutes later. And in the Allied camps, there was no celebration, only relief. The Americans respected the Tiger, even loved to hate it. But they didn't cheer when it died. Because by then they had learned that killing a legend never feels like victory. It feels like silence. The tiger's remains became monuments of contradiction, awe, and ruin welded together. Soldiers posed for photos beside them, smiling for the camera boots resting on armor that once terrified them. But behind those smiles, you can almost see it, a kind of quiet reverence, the strange humility that comes after surviving something greater than understanding. By April 1945, as the Allies closed in on Germany, the last tigers fought not for strategy, but for memory. Around Berlin, a handful of them, fewer than 20, defended streets already reduced to dust. They fired until their barrels split, until their engines seized, until the ground beneath them burned. And when the end came, it came without spectacle. The most feared tank in the world was left rusting under cherry blossoms and rubble. When Berlin fell, a few surviving tigers were dragged to testing grounds displayed in museums studied by generations of soldiers who would never hear that sound, the deep resonant roar of the Maybach engine, the slow metallic heartbeat that once made the earth tremble. In the archives of the U.S. Army Ordnance Museum, one report ends with a single sentence almost poetic in its precision. The tiger was defeated not by penetration, but by pressure. Pressure of time, of numbers, of industry, of inevitability. The kind of pressure that no armor, no engineering, no faith can withstand. And perhaps that's the true ending of this story. The tiger was not destroyed by an enemy. It was undone by the world that surrounded it, a world that had moved beyond myths and into machines. Still, its ghost lingers, in every story told by the men who saw it, in every photograph where it looms behind the smoke, in every museum, every model, every dream of mechanical perfection. The tiger didn't just belong to Germany, it belongs to history itself now. It stands as a monument to what human hands can build when they chase the impossible and to what they lose when they reach it. Because in the end, the tiger's greatest flaw was the same thing that made it beautiful. It was too perfect, too proud, too human. When the last tiger stopped moving, the war did not end. But something in the world did. The age of the individual machine, the mythic weapon, the single engine of destiny, faded into the past. What replaced it was colder, larger, faceless, the age of massive systems of relentless production. The tiger was the last roar of the romantic warrior and the first casualty of the industrial god. And so, as the camera pulls back from the wreckage, as the fog closes over the fields of Normandy once more, we hear that sound again, faint, almost forgotten. The echo of a shell striking armor, a heartbeat of steel fading into the wind. Somewhere in that echo, the legend still lives, not as victory, not as defeat, but as memory. The war ended, but the echoes never did. In the quiet fields of France, where the hedgerows once trembled beneath the thunder of engines, silence has returned. But it's not the same silence as before. It's heavier now, older, filled with ghosts. The tiger's wrecks lie half buried in the soil rust, eating through armor that once defied everything. Grass grows over its treads, rain fills the hollow barrels, and the earth slowly takes back what man once built to kill. And yet, if you stand there long enough, if you close your eyes and let the wind move through the grass, you can almost hear it. That sound, the low hum of power, the heartbeat of something that was once invincible, and now only memory. History moves forward, but memory circles back. The American veterans who faced the tiger grew old, their hair turned silver, their hands unsteady. But when they spoke of it, when they spoke of that moment, that impossible sound of a shell bouncing off armor, their eyes sharpened again. You could see it in them. They had never really left that field. The war had ended on paper, but not in their minds. One of them, a gunner named Lasky, once said in an interview, You can forget the day you killed a man, but you never forget the day you couldn't. He paused, then looking down at his hands that still trembled when he remembered the ricochet. That's when you learn what fear really is. It's not dying. It's realizing your best isn't enough. The tiger lived on in more ways than steel could explain. It became legend, yes, but also mirror. Every generation that studied it saw a reflection of themselves. Engineers admired it. Soldiers respected it. Historians argued over it. But the truth lay somewhere between admiration and warning. Because the tiger was never just a tank. It was an idea, the idea that perfection could make one man stronger than 100. That design could conquer destiny. But the war had proven something else entirely. That even perfection must bow to time, to mass, to the unstoppable tide of men who refuse to stop coming. The tiger didn't fall because it was weak. It fell because it was alone. Years after the war, American engineers would find themselves building new machines faster, stronger, armed with the lessons learned from those days. The M46 Patton, the M60, the Abrams. Each one carried a shadow of the tiger inside it, not in its steel, but in its spirit. The balance of armor and mobility, the demand for power and precision, all of it born from that moment in Normandy when a shell bounced and history shuddered. The tiger became the ancestor of modern war. And yet, when those same engineers visited the museums where a few surviving tigers stood in Bovington, in Saumur, in Kubinka, they went quiet. They didn't look at it like a machine. They looked at it like an artifact of something sacred. The rivets, the weld lines, the thickness of its plates, the smell of oil still clinging to the metal after 70 years. It still felt alive. Like if you waited long enough, it might start again. Every war leaves behind symbols. Some are flags, some are names on stone. The tiger was both and neither. It didn't symbolize victory. It symbolized the cost of greatness. It stood for what happens when brilliance outpaces reality. When the pursuit of invincibility forgets the frailty of those who must serve it. In its shadow, you can almost see the hands that built it. The German machinists working under bomb sirens. The engineers drafting by candlelight. The crews cleaning the gun barrels in freezing dawns. They weren't building monsters. They were building meaning. And that may be the most haunting truth of all, that something so terrible was also so human. For the Americans, the tiger became a story to tell and to teach. Never underestimate the enemy, they said. Never assume the armor will hold. But for some, it became a kind of dark admiration. You could see it in how they spoke of it, not with hatred, but with respect. "It was the best damn machine I ever saw," one veteran said softly, "and thank God it was theirs, not ours." He smiled when he said it, but there was no joy in that smile, only the faint relief of a man who had seen too much to call anything glorious again. Now, decades later, the world has changed. The machines are faster, the wars more distant, but the lesson remains the same. Technology changes, but courage and fear do not. The tiger's story still echoes because it reminds us of that fragile line between mastery and madness, between invention and obsession. It reminds us that every machine ever built to protect men can also outlive them. Walk through the ruins of Normandy today, and you'll find pieces of that history scattered in the earth, shards of armor, a rusted tread, the faint shape of a turret under moss. Children play nearby, running where soldiers once crawled. Farmers plow over fields that once burned. Life somehow always returns, and yet the ground still hums faintly underfoot, as if something beneath it remembers. The tiger's myth no longer belongs to Germany or to America or to war. It belongs to time, to every place where the line between strength and ruin blurred into silence. Sometimes when the camera pans across those quiet meadows, you can imagine a narrator's voice fading softer, slower, until it's almost a whisper. They thought their shells would pierce anything, until they didn't. They thought victory was certain, until the earth reminded them otherwise. The tiger taught them something the textbooks never could, that fear can have an engine, and that even legends rust. Night falls again over the fields. The wind carries the faint smell of grass and diesel. The sky glows red for a moment, the same color as tracer fire once was. And somewhere in that endless distance between sound and silence, a memory breathes again. The creak of treads, the murmur of a crew, the echo of a man saying it bounced. But this time the sound fades. It doesn't end, it just drifts away, swallowed by the rhythm of the world moving on. And as the music rises, low strings, distant trumpets, the kind of score that feels like fog lifting, the camera drifts upward. Normandy shrinks below. The hedgerows form patterns like scars across the landscape. Rivers glint like veins under twilight. The land remembers everything, but it also forgives. The final words come softly, almost like a prayer. Some legends die when the last shot is fired. Others never stop echoing. Fade to black.